think we are live on Facebook and YouTube as well, maybe. Aha! The system works, and Tim Lorking is the first one in the room. Pick a seat, mate. There's no set seats here. You can sit wherever you want tonight. Joey, can you just check if we're live on Facebook for me?
Yeah, I can see you.
Beauty.
Yeah, it's working.
Awesome. Yes. It's a little bit harder to put intro music on virtually. I don't have a CD player.
The only thing is Facebook recognizes music, so then it just blanks all sound if it picks up an audio that isn't like being paid for.
Yeah. This is the bit where I'm ticking off names in the hallway as people start to come through. Mate, you got to get a toilet inside that. Yeah, just through the course to the left. Blokes to the right, ladies to the left. Oh, I've actually come with 4 of my mates. Is there like a way that we can put a couple of tables together? Oh, yeah, just give me 2 seconds, mate. So yeah, we can work this out.
No dramas. Okay, what are we starting on? Ardmore?
Yeah.
Cool. Let's pour another one.
I think we'll I haven't given a lineup to people. I thought you might want to decide that, so we can we'll just go through that when we kick off as well. This digital thing, easy.
I've got my new fire pit being delivered tomorrow, Scott.
Oh yeah?
1.5 tonne it weighs.
Yeah, right. How big is it?
Pretty big.
Is it one of those where you can drop it into the ground?
Yeah. So it's a mine. It's actually cut from a mine. It's a drill piece.
Yeah, right.
That's the reverse of the drill piece that we're actually going to use as fire.
One of my best mates' fiance makes fire pits. Got a family brand.
Yeah, cool. Louise should be on now.
You wanted the Zoom link, didn't you, Joey? I have just flicked that one to you. So what have you been doing, Cam?
Mate, fair bit of this sort of stuff. So doing a bit of internal training with the team. We're doing some live stuff through the bartending networks for all the guys in the on-premise who are sort of without bars, obviously, to work in at the moment. So doing a bit of stuff called the social exchange with them. Less focused on like the drilling down hard into the booze, but more just talking industry and having a bit of fun.
He has pants.
Yeah, I do that one without pants. I'll put pants on tonight. But
That's pretty special.
Yeah.
We're feeling pretty lucky here.
But it's just starting to gear up now. So I think more and more venues are starting to wanting to do some remote link training and remote link like master classes and stuff like that. So
yeah, it's certainly an interesting old time.
Definitely. I mean, it feels like a while, but it's only really been a couple of weeks, right? So
yeah, I tell you what, like yeah. Like yeah, but yeah, these sort of things have been real fun.
Yeah, it's been good.
I think once all this, clears up and blows over as well, something we can continue to do.
Yeah, definitely. I think there is a certain level of, particularly for people who aren't close to the inner city, a chance to involve themselves and not have to travel so far to do cool stuff. So
yeah, there's a few regulars that come to not all the tastings, and we used to come to a lot of them, who were getting in a little bit of trouble by their partners by going out to whiskey tastings on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday night, with now having young kids at home. So I think they're quite happy that they can do it and not get yelled at.
Yeah, definitely.
Hey, Scott, even to a point of when we're doing stuff, when everything does get back to normal, there's nothing stopping us from reaching out in the room and having a live feed from the room.
Yeah. It's actually something we looked at doing, but I couldn't. I need to get a different camera because basically I was walking around too much.
One of the things, Cam's got a new camera system that actually follows the actual tripod, hooks onto your like whichever face you want it to be onto, and actually follows you wherever you go.
Yeah, right.
It's got a little setup.
But
yeah, definitely. At least I think there's the audio versions of the tastings.
yeah.
But yeah, no, it's actually going to do some private ones for people, just like groups of mates and housemates and work colleagues that are all doing their best not to kill each other at the moment.
Yeah.
So similar sort of thing, like send this out and then we just organise a time with them. So I had a few inquiries about that today, which is really cool.
Yeah, we're happy to do the more the merrier, So
yeah,
keeps me sane as well.
Have you been out of that room in the past 2 weeks?
Me?
Yeah.
Twice in the last 2.5 weeks I've been out of the house. That's it.
And once was to get something off me at the road.
Yeah, that's pretty much. I went downstairs and picked up point of sale. That's about it. At least it's not a dry room. I'll say that.
Where's the bookcase?
I hit it all. I don't want to make everyone too jealous, but
Look behind me.
Yeah, well,
you're just showing off, mate.
Yeah, exactly. It's just a green screen. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Hang on.
Zoom does have that function, I'm pretty sure.
It does, yeah.
That's right. I only invited Michael on just because I think every Zoom needs a punching bag, Cam. So
100%.
Happy to take one for the team.
Well, I'm glad to say the system works for the first time ever. And actually, just on the Facebook there, we had Mark Westmoreland popping in to say hi. He is the global BA for Wolfburn up in Thursday.
Oh, awesome. Welcome.
Says Morven would be a lovely hello to a peated introduction, which the Morven is very good, actually. But g'day to Mark. I know he was in, I don't know where in the world he is at the moment, because he was in New Zealand taking a bit of an extended holiday. There it is, 128, after Dramfest. And that's when things got quite real quite quickly. So I don't know if he's still hiking around some backyard in New Zealand or he's back in Scotland, but he's a good bloke. I like Mark.
It's a nice whiskey too.
Very good. Very, very good whiskey.
I got 9.
Yeah, I reckon you can finish that before the night's done as well.
9 different whiskies.
All right. So I'll be monitoring the Facebook, YouTube, and the Zoom for questions, and I'll just interrupt you, Cam, when people have got questions. There's some of your Japanese whiskey, Mike.
What's left?
Yeah, pretty much.
Did you end up getting much of the Hakushu distillers or not? None turned up.
Got Yamadea, but not Hakushu. Isn't it funny? Like that was the one.
Yeah, you're the second person.
Yeah, like 2 years ago, it was the one you always had the most of. The one that you could sort of keep. And in the past, 18 months, I don't think I've seen a bottle of it.
Yeah.
Just as you do all that work to get, people thinking about it, and really excited about it.
Groundswell starts working for you and you're going, yeah, this is cool, this is cool, this is cool.
Rug,
Make hate. Have Toki. I'll look into that for you, Scott. I think I've got some floating around.
And Mark is back in Scotland, so that's good to hear. In warm, sunny, tropical Thursday.
What time is it in Scotland?
It'd be in the morning. Be about 9:30, I reckon.
Commonwealth Bank's open somewhere.
Yeah. There's a bit of chatter going on in the Zoom, and this is the bit where people are still standing up in the tasting room. They haven't taken their seats yet. They're running into old friends, coming in here. So we've got people saying g'day from what I believe is Orange, talking to Young out in the mighty Central West. So, all right, I reckon I'm getting 6:30 on my clock.
Yeah, let's do it.
So I believe we should kick off. We're live everywhere. And g'day, everyone. Welcome to another Oak Barrel virtual whiskey tasting. My name is Scott Fitzsimons. I look after all the whiskey and spirits decisions here at the Oak Barrel in Sydney CBD. And joined tonight by 2 very special guests from the Exchange, Cam Pirret. Give us a wave, Cam.
Hey, guys. How you doing?
And Mike Thomas.
Hey, guys.
Not sitting in the office, I don't think. He's sitting in some
It is my office. It is my office, Scott.
Yeah. So tonight is a pretty simple occasion. Obviously, we can't have you all here into our tasting room to go through some whiskey. So I've sent them all out to you guys. And we're going to go through them one by one, talking about each whiskey, but also talking about peat and smoky whiskies and what that actually means. Because I think it can be glossed over often. And sometimes you get the concept where a smoky whiskey is a smoky whiskey. We're going to have 4 smoky whiskies tonight that are all completely different. So normally at the start of a tasting as well, I point out the toilets at the back of the room. You're going to have to point out your own toilets there. I think it's also time to remember there's plenty of water to drink, so please don't drive home from your living room to your bedroom. Please walk home tonight when you get home. And also, the whiskies we're trying tonight are 50 mils. Normally in a tasting we'll use 15 mils, so that is less than half of one of these little bottles. So just remember that when you're pouring out your whiskies tonight, because if you drink 200 mils, that's quite a lot of whiskey. But we're not here to listen to me jabber on, and we've got some whiskey to drink. So I might just another couple of things quickly. There's a few different ways that people are watching this tonight. So on the Facebook and the YouTube, that's pretty self-explanatory. If you've got any questions, just ask them there. If you are in the Zoom chat, there's the webinar chat here that you can sort of chat to each other. And you can choose whether you send to all attendees or panelists. If you send to all panelists, we will see it, but other people won't. You can also send messages direct to other people. So that can be a little bit fiddly to get your head around at the start. And at the bottom, there's a section that says ask a question. So if you want to, that will actually get logged to us and I can see it. And then if we miss anything throughout the night, I can refer back to that at the end and ask more questions. But this is a bit of an intro class. So we're going to not assume too much knowledge tonight. So there's no such thing as a dumb question. And it really is, the more questions you ask, the more we're going to be able to give back and give you something to talk about. So I'm going to throw to Cam and Michael here to introduce the exchange a little bit and then maybe kick us off. And also, because we've got a question from Tom Scott on the Facebook saying, we'd like to know the order of the whiskies because he's getting a little bit jittery and just needs a bit of a whiskey hit and needs to know which order we're going to do them in. So guys, thanks for tuning in from bedrooms and lounge rooms and home bars around the world.
Guys, thank you so much. On behalf of Mike and myself and the exchange, thank you so much to Oakvale and Scotty for having us along. Obviously a really different experience for us, but thank you so much for the support. And it's really encouraging to see people still wanting to get amongst it and change things up to try and sort of, I guess, deal with being in our living room and drinking a bit of whiskey. We're going to talk through the peated malts tonight. For those who don't have the packs but might be at home and have some of these around, we're going to run it really simply in the same order as the pack. So we're going to start with our Ardmore, our Connemara, then our Bowmore, and then finish with our Laphroaig, kind of going in ascending order of peat, essentially. So we're going to run it in that order. So for those guys who want to start with a little whiskey, by all means, we're going to start with the Ardmore. If you do want to pour yourself a little dram, I thought as we're doing a bit more of a beginner sort of thing tonight, and just covering off exactly what a single malt and what peat is, if you do want to start with a little sip of your whiskey while I take you through that, by all means, we're going to start with the Ardmore. But yeah, as I said, first I thought we'd explain what makes a peated malt. So what we're looking at tonight are all single malt whiskies. That means they're made from 100% malted barley, and they're all made from one single distillery. Now, how the distillery puts together their whiskies that they've matured in different barrels, that's fine. That's a marriage during the blending and maturation part at that distillery. But as long as it's made in that one distillery with 100% malted barley, then we're talking about a single malt whiskey here. Now, it's that malting part. So it's that malting part, guys, that kind of brings in when we talk about peated whiskey. So we start with an unmalted barley grain or a dried barley grain. And what we want to do is we want to increase the level of sugar in that grain. It gives us a higher yield and basically more alcohol production, makes it a lot more efficient grain to make alcohol out of. The way we increase that sugar is by tricking it into thinking it's in the soil and it's time to germinate or start making shoots for trees. And that increases the sugar, rapidly converting those starches into usable sugars. So the way we do that is we soak it in warm water and spread it out across a large concrete floor in a big warehouse to about 2 to 3 feet deep. And then we turn it every 4 hours with like a giant rake. The guys go along and do it, and they pretty much do a whole floor and then start again. It's pretty backbreaking work. They're big, strong guys. And what that's doing is it's keeping it nice and consistently warm and damp and tricking that grain into thinking it's back in the soil. So again, that's that malting process. It takes us about a week, about 5 to 7 days. And at the end of that process, we have to stop it building those sugars up. Otherwise, it will start to produce those shoots, and they will use all that sugar. And then that grain is dead to us once we can see those new sprouts coming out. It doesn't have the sugar we need. So the way we stop that is with heat. Now, in our unpeated whiskies, they simply use large fan force ovens. They bring the heat up and stop that process. What we're talking about with peated whiskies is we spread that on a drying rack, and underneath that rack, we shovel in peat that we source from the earth, and we use that peat to fuel the fire. And that peat releases plumes of really jet black smoke, really thick smoke. And it's that smoke that sticks to that grain during that drying process. And that's what ends up giving us our smoky character right at the end in the whiskey. You will hear some people say it's because of the level of peat in the water, or because it's like the char in the barrel. These are all sort of fallacies. I mean, if they do add anything to the whiskey, it's so minuscule compared to the giant flavor of peat we get from that smoking process. That's really where this all comes from. To that end, what is peat? Peat is not just dirt or mud. It's actually decaying organic matter. It sits somewhere between compost and coal. We dig down between 2 and 9 foot into the earth to harvest it, and it flourishes in places that have lots of rainfall and really poor drainage, places like Scotland, Tasmania. And essentially, because of that lack of drainage, the peat sort of forms there a bit slower so we can get access to it. And what happens is we bring it up and dry it and it becomes like a really crumbly sort of dirt, but it is decayed organic matter, as I said. So really, it's a bit of a snapshot of what was there thousands of years ago. And for that reason, it does have an element of terroir. It does matter where your peat comes from. When we look at some of the Islay peats later, or the Islay malts in our Bowmore and Laphroaig later on, what you'll see is it does have that real sort of seaweed, iodine, briny sort of smoke to it. It's really heavy and powerful because it's come from the islands. It's got that sort of oceanic expression in it. When we look at some of our mainland peats or peats dug from like the Highlands of Scotland, much more earthy, mossy, floral, and a very much different, or if you will, sort of lighter style of smoke. And that's just because of where the peat itself has been sourced from. So essentially that's the peating part of our process, is drying that grain. Then with your peated malts, we continue on with the same sort of process as we would with most normal whiskies. We take that peated malted barley grain, we crush it and cook it in hot water. We then ferment it for anywhere from about 3 up to 6 to 7 days, depending on whether you want a long or a short ferment for your whiskey. And we then take that and we add yeast. So in that ferment, to get it to about 10%, we then take that, we distill it twice in our beautiful copper pot stills to get us, depending on your distillery, somewhere from about 65 up to maybe 80% alcohol. At this stage, completely clear liquid, so no color. And we sort of say about 30% of the flavor, give or take, is responsible from that process. The whole thing we've done at the distillery, that's our distillery characteristic. And then the second part, the maturation, is where the barrel really takes over and gives us 100% of the color. And depending on the whiskey you're drinking, probably like 60 to 70% of that flavor is coming from that wood and that maturation. So with all that said, guys, that's sort of the process. We might dive in and try our first whiskey. For those who've been patiently waiting with me, they're probably a bit thirsty. We're going to try the Ardmore. So Ardmore, actually, the distillery's up in Kemensmouth in the Aberdeen Shire. And it's actually situated at the highest part of the Northern Railroad. It's about 6,000 meters above sea level. And it was started by William Teacher's son, Adam Teacher's. For those who are familiar with Teacher's, we do the Teacher's Highland Cream, which is our blended whiskey. So originally what Ardmore was created for, essentially, was to be the peated single malt in our blended whiskey. Most of your blended whiskeys will have an element of peat there for that balance. A lot of them have always sort of, that's originally what a lot of peated malts were being used for. Nowadays, we've got a love for them, which I'm really excited about, that we're drinking them a lot more as single malts than they were sort of back in the day. A lot of the times they were going into that blending. So that's what it was originally used for. Alistair, our master distiller and blender, had asked for a long time to be allowed to release a single malt out of the Teacher's distillery, the Ardmore distillery, sorry. And then eventually they sort of caved and said, yes, you can go ahead and do it. So what we're looking at here is an Ardmore that's finished in a quarter cask. So it's got a lot more of that lovely sort of wood, that sawdust and vanilla flavor to it from that second maturation in quarter cask. That smaller cask just increases that wood flavor, smaller surface area to volume ratio. In terms of the peat in this whiskey, it is a Highland peat, so it's a little bit lighter, a little more like of that earthy, mossy flavor coming through. And it's only peated to about 15 ppm. So we measure peat in parts per million. It's just the phenolic compounds they can measure off that malted barley or off that spirit, depending on which section they measure that at. But essentially, the bigger the number, the bigger the peat. So we're going to start here with 15, and then we will work our way up to the Laphroaigs, which are 40. ppm. So for those who are waiting, let's dive in and have a little taste.
I might just jump in there quickly and pick up at a couple of points.
Yeah,
and
please.
it's something that you said very early on. And when we talk about, obviously, we talk a lot about wine here at the Oak Barrel as well. And terroir and soil is so important. You can have, two vineyards that are literally across the road from each other, create two very different parts of wine. And you don't get to talk about terroir as much as in whiskey because your water's going through a filter, your barrels are coming from an external source. But one of the true terroir elements of whiskey is when you're using peat to dry your barley. And as you sort of spoke about, I don't think I've been lucky enough to actually try and cut peat for whiskey production in Islay with Laphroaig and also with Lark down in Tasmania. And I can tell you that peat bogs on Islay, on a very small, windswept, no tree island where you can see and smell the coast, as opposed to a cow paddock up in the Tasmanian Highlands, very different places, very different temperatures, very different aromas. So I do love, when we're talking about peat, it's my chance here as the spirits expert to talk about terroir, and otherwise the wine people just get to have that term for themselves.
Yeah, exactly. And it is probably one of the most, the truer places of terroir in whiskey making. Some people argue about where you get your barley from matters. The consensus is it doesn't really matter. They'll argue about where you malt it. There's arguments about where you age the whiskey matters or not. There's some people who say it doesn't really matter where you stick your barrels within a region. Of course, we're talking about like within the Scotland area. Like obviously, there's massive differences in climate between the US and Scotland and Japan and all the places around the world that make spirit. But I think the one place where there is very much consensus, obviously, around that terroir is 100% the peat and where you source your peat from. And I think that's the reason why, particularly when we get to the Islay whiskies, they're so polarizing and yet so popular amongst the people who love them, because there is just a certain flavor of Islay peated whiskey that you just can't replicate.
And it'd be interesting to see, and I've had a few people text me in their little setups at home. So if you've got whiskies lined up in cheese boards and things going on, we'd like to see photos of that as well. But I remember the first time I ever tried a properly heavily peated whiskey was I was living up in Redfern, and there was a bottle store that I used to walk past back when I was in the music industry. About once a month, I would buy the next whiskey for about $50, and that's sort of how I got into it. And I remember trying a peated whiskey for the first time, and I'm not a smoker, never have been, so just that smoke just blew my head off. And I went home and I was like, why the hell would anyone do this for fun? Like, this is ridiculous. So it went to the back of the cupboard, and then about 6 months down the track, obviously a little bit desperate, and there's nothing left in the house, got this back out again and fell in love with it. And I think my palate had evolved a little bit to the point where I wasn't just getting smoke, I was getting the underlying elements of this as well. And I think, I'm a huge fan of Ardmore, whether it's an official bottling or independent bottling, and the old traditional and now the legacy, just that sort of that earthy, that dryness underneath the smoke is something that I love and I always come back to.
Yeah, so, beautiful.
Does the peat terrain change in particular regions as well? So depending on what's actually under the ground or what was actually on the ground back in the day?
Yes, I mean, that's essentially the premise behind it. If you think about the Highlands of Scotland, you would have had flora and fauna like trees and heather and animals that are making up that organic decay underneath the soil, whereas you've got to think you're going to have like sea logs, seaweed, fish, rocks, stuff like that down in the islands that are making up that part of the decay. So it really is a snapshot, as I said, of what was kind of there thousands of years ago that will make up the flavor profile of that peat when you smoke it and use it to smoke your barley. I think it's funny with you talking about not liking peat the first time. Believe me, guys, I definitely didn't. I think my first peated whiskey was just the regular Ardbeg 10-year-old and thought it was the most disgusting thing I'd ever had in my life. But the funny story was actually the Ardbeg Ugadell a couple of years later that brought me back, and all of a sudden behind the smoke I could taste like apple and honey, all these light sort of flavors that I could just never taste before. So I guess it's like everything. I think the first beer I had at a pub I struggled through, so I could be cool with my old man. But I love it now, but yeah, didn't like it back then. So,
and that's the thing with booze in general, just persistence. That's really important. Just push through those pain barriers.
Yeah, I think there's no pressure to ever like anything you don't like. Like, don't make yourself drink stuff, but at the same time, never just try something once and then be like, well, I'm done with that. Like, always go back to things you think you don't like. It's like anything. Same with food, drinks. I mean, I think people are just open to trying new things or revisiting things they once thought they didn't like. We're going to end up, as they go through life, having more richer experiences with food and drink, because you're just going to keep opening yourselves up to as your palate changes. I mean, to be honest with you, what's actually happening as you get older is your palate is not getting better. It's actually getting a lot duller. When you're born, you have way more taste and smell receptors. So as you're an adult, you destroy them with booze and cigarettes and life and coffee. And so what happens is actually the aggressive flavors you can't really stomach when you're younger. You start to go look for those flavors when you're older because you want that taste. You want the funkiness of things like foie gras and caviar and peated whiskey and and of course they make it all expensive for us, right? As we get older, but yeah. So
what you're saying is we should really be drinking whiskey from about 3 or 4. So,
yeah, we should start younger for sure, right?
Yeah.
I didn't say that.
Scott?
Yeah. I was like, this is going, we're live? Oh, crap, yeah, bugger.
So, guys, if you are joining me with this one, as we said, if you sort of get past that light, earthy smoke, I do get sort of fresh cut sawdust there. There's a little that like real oakiness, the big vanilla. I get a little bit of honey and sort of some nuts and almonds and stuff. There's like a light grassiness to it, and then obviously a little bit of stone fruit coming through, like flecks of like peach and green apple and stuff.
So, Cam, a quick question for you, Cam. If you're going to have some cheeses or meats with the Ardmore, what would you probably suggest starting off with?
100%. If you can get yourself something firm with a little bit of saltiness to it, even like something along the lines like a manchego or something like that goes beautifully with the Ardmore. Just that little bit of earthiness and lightness pairs really, really well. In terms of a meat, if you can find yourself something soft that just wants a pinch of sort of like salt and smoke, we used to do a pairing with a bit of liverwurst. So it's like pork liver pate almost, and it works really, really well. But if you have something along the lines of sort of like a mortadella or one of those softer style of meats, it sort of, this doesn't overpower it too much. It just adds a little bit of that floral and that smoke. It's quite nice. But yeah, nice firm cheese with this one, something with a little bit of salt, really, really good.
A couple of people commenting in. Connell writes on the Facebook stream, says, g'day. So g'day, Connell. Crafty Field is actually driving at the moment. So Crafty, please don't take part in this. You can watch it after.
Don't drink and drive.
Yeah, don't do that. There's a couple of comments there that, be careful about mentioning age too much. There's a couple of 60-year-olds in the chat there. So I do think a 60 seems to be where just that peak, I think, is where everything comes together.
That's new 40, Scott. That's the new 40.
Yeah. And Tim Lawking is happy for us to send caviar with the next tasting pack as well. I think that might flunk the $50 price point a little bit, but maybe if
BYO caviar.
If Beam-Suntory wants to, kick in a little bit, we can maybe get there.
BYO caviar.
Yeah. Now, obviously, the order we're doing this tonight is moving from the lighter flavors into the heavier flavors. It's not about price point or rarity or anything like that. But, with all these sorts of tastings, so we are starting with the lightest, and we're going to try and keep as much normality to these sorts of things. So it wouldn't be an oak barrel tasting with peated whiskey unless I threw a steam train tasting note in there. So we're going to get some pretty weird tasting notes as we go along, but I think I pick up a lot of that grassiness.
Yep.
So this is almost sort of like one of those live steam garden scale trains. So you don't get that big coal sooty fire. You get that sort of that garden. So this is like model train going through a garden is my tasting note for this one.
That works.
Yeah. So yeah.
So guys, if you do happen to see, this is obviously the legacy we're trying now, but if you do get to see some of the other ones floating around, they do some really amazing independents. If you like the legacy, it's a great place to start, but they're harder to find. Obviously not directly distributed by us here in Australia, but they do some amazing other whiskies as well. So if you are sort of loving this and wanting to just diversify your whiskey journey a bit, there are plenty of others in the range that are a little bit more difficult to come by. But obviously start with the legacy and see if you like what Ardmore does as a distillery. But some really cool stuff in the range as well.
Very good price point as well. And this is a soft sell. This is not a hard sell tasting money stretch of the imagination. But we have done some special pricing for tonight. If anyone wants to get a full-size bottle as well. I think we're down sub $60 for a bottle of this, which I don't know how is quite possible with tax and imports and that sort of thing, but there we are. Someone's losing money.
It's a good whiskey to have. You can drink it, and then because you're stuck inside with other people, if they try and get their mitts on it, it's not going to completely destroy you, so it's all right. You can share it around. So guys, we'll move along and have a look at the second whiskey that we've got tonight. In the Connemara, absolutely one of my favorite whiskeys, bang for buck, but just completely delicious. And a bit of an interesting whiskey from the point that it's actually an Irish single malt that we're trying tonight. But without going too far down Irish history, essentially the Irish, if anyone's Scottish, don't hate me, but there's a lot of conjecture that the Irish are sort of the fathers of whiskey. They invented whiskey production. And in fact, their whiskey industry, come the turn of sort of the 18th century, was about 348 distilleries, give or take. So it was massive. If you think now that Scotland's probably got about 122, 124, I think, last count, including some of the grain ones. So it's about 3 times the size of the Scottish whiskey market now. It was absolutely huge. And they had a lot of things that sort of derailed that industry a bit. There was some pretty massive distillery fires in Dublin at the time. Dublin housed about 100 of those distilleries and warehouses. And because of the fire and the carnage it caused and some really serious health issues with people trying to drink whiskey that had spilled out in the streets, it still to this day is illegal to age whiskey within 100 kilometres of Dublin. So even the one distillery that's there in Teeling still has to ship their barrels 100 kilometres away to age them. So that was a big hamper on their industry. Obviously, there was tension with the English, and that was seceding from the English, and for a while didn't have any trade with the English, which didn't bother the Irish too much because America was the emerging market. They're like, it doesn't matter. America will pick up the gap in volume and really keep us very safe, very strong as an industry. And of course, then America goes through prohibition. So then your second biggest customer base says, I can't buy any more off you legally. And at that time, America looked to places like Canada, just across the river from Detroit to get their whiskey, and places like down south to get their rum. It was a lot easier than trying to get stuff in from Ireland and Scotland. And then on top of that, they had some issues obviously around, they had to use Irish grain to make their whiskey, or Irish barley. Of course, then there was a famine, and all that was like made illegal to distill. It had to be used for bread to feed the people. And they had a bit of resistance. You got to remember, single malt whiskey has really had a resurgence lately and quite big now. But for a long part of whiskey history, blended whiskey has been the norm and the favorite of what to drink for that consistency piece, especially when shipping to outside markets like the US. And the Irish actually had a bit of resistance to using the column still or the coffee still. So they couldn't produce that grain spirit that we use in our blended whiskey as quick as the Scottish. They couldn't keep up with the volume demand for blended for a while. So all this together, I think by about 1950, there was only 3 distilleries left in Ireland. So they pretty much almost wiped out their own industry. Now they're approaching back up. I think there's going to be about 30 something come the end of this year. But yeah, so they almost sort of obliterated their industry a little bit. So what happened in about the 1970s, 80s, when Pernod Ricard sort of took over Middleton Distillery, they said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to differentiate ourselves really, really, really heavily from the Scots. So we're not going to do double distill anymore. We're going to make everything triple distilled. We're not going to do peated anymore. We're going to do completely unpeated whiskey. They obviously had solutions to that in certain areas with cork and stuff. So they were going to do unpeated whiskey. And they're going to still keep those big Irish stills, much larger stills that give you a much sort of lighter and more earthy style flavor. So yeah, they basically said we're going to differentiate. It's not a law that they have to do it that way. That's just the way they pushed it, so they could differentiate themselves away from the Scots and have their own strong and vibrant industry. And if you look at some of the amazing whiskies coming out of Middleton Distillery as the example, in like the Redbreast stuff and some of the spots and some of the stuff the guys at Bushmills and that are doing, and even Teelings, they have done a good job at reinvigorating it as a different whiskey to Scotch and are doing really well. This is a bit different. In 1980, Dr. John Teeling decided he wanted to go back to making Irish whiskey the traditional sort of Irish way, or the way it was being made back when they started. And that was a lot like the Scots, double distilled, single malt, and peated. A lot of your other Irish whiskey today, most of it, in fact, is not single malt. It's more what they call a single pot. So they use malted and unmalted barley, again, making a little less rounder in mouthfeel and a bit lighter and cleaner. So he's like, no, I'm going to go back to the original way. So Dr. John Teeling started up the Cooley distillery, and yeah, went back to doing double distilled, lightly peated, single malt. We also resurrected Kilbeggan Distillery, which has been around since 1757. So as long as you don't, and we fight with Bushmills about this, but we're both fighting for oldest licensed distillery in the world. So it depends who you ask. I'm going to say it's Kilbeggan. If you ask someone, they'll say it's Bushmills, but we're both pretty much the two that are right up there. So we were licensed in 1757. Beautiful old distillery that now makes a fair proportion of the alcohol that goes into Connemara. Absolutely stunning distillery. Yeah, a really beautiful whiskey, guys. So this one is lightly peated again. It still is that sort of, it's not that Islay style peat. It's a much more lighter Highlands style peat. That earthy sort of floral smoke again. But being an Irish whiskey, it's really that like green apple, cut grass, honey, stone fruit again. Very, very similar, I guess, in terms of the Ardmore. You're just sort of looking across at how the Irish are doing it. This one is actually a blending of 8, 10, and 12-year-old ex-bourbon barrels. So those 3 ages blended together. Let's go and give it a try, guys.
I don't really have a dog in the fight, Cameron, because even though I'm a Fitzsimons, that's an Irish name. On the other side, the grandfather was Scottish, so I'm a proper mutt. Yeah. But and there's been a few comments on that. It's really hard to track the history of Irish whiskey because you get very blurry when you get to Aqua Vitae and you start talking about brandy, burnt wine. All of a sudden you're back to the Romans and where did it actually become how we look at it today. But I think from the research I've done, the whiskey that we drink today, the Irish are probably doing that a little bit before the Scots were. But I love Irish whiskey, and I say this without a word of exaggeration. It is the most exciting time in Irish whiskey for over a century right now.
Yeah,
all the
100%.
stuff you were talking about happened about 100 years ago. We're getting up to 100-year centenaries, and it's only really been now that the boom has started again. And yes, that concept of, in the 50s and 60s when the Irish industry pulled back and said, hold on, what are we going to, how do we market Irish whiskey again? They doubled down on brands like Jameson and Tullamore Dew, the lighter styles that they could flog to the Americans. You look at Scotch distilleries built in the 50s and 60s, they make light whiskey to flog to the Yanks. So, but you go back 100 years before, in the 1800s, when Dublin's the whiskey centre of the world, if you're talking about heavier whiskey, you're talking about Irish. The Scottish was the lighter option. So I think it's important to remember that, but without a word of exaggeration, the most exciting time for Irish whiskey in over a century right now, which is cool because I've been sort of pushing back my next Irish trip because I could go a couple of years ago and look at a lot of holes in the ground where distilleries were going to be. But I reckon soon I can go and look at distilleries that now exist and are built or, actually have booze to try.
Yeah, and as I was saying, when I was there, I think they were nudging, I think there's about 6 to 8 distilleries were on the island at the time. This is 2 years ago. But yeah, by now I think they had aimed to have had, there was like 33 in construction. So it's really exciting the amount of distilleries that are popping up. And yeah, again, I don't really have a dog in the fight. And I think you can go far back and try and look at history of alcohol, but it's also been recorded by alcoholics. So it's a bit hazy. But I think in terms of which market was the biggest for the style of heavy whiskey we recognize today, Ireland probably was the bigger originally, and it's been shaped back the other way, as I said, by those lighter brands to try and reinvent itself. But it's really exciting time because you're starting to get guys like Connemara and Cooley, and even obviously Dr. Don Teeling, if that name rang a bell, it was him who went down and opened up Teeling Distillery in Dublin and in fact took a lot of the juice from Cooley with him. So some really cool stuff happening in Ireland at the moment. I think you'll start to see Irish whiskey as a place people are starting to dive into, to really try some different stuff in the world of whiskey, which is, really, really cool.
Yeah. Again, always been a big fan of Connemara. Even when I first sort of tripped over it in the older style bottles. And it's that earthiness. I know that Ardmore actually does take their peat locally. I think it's from St Fergus on the east coast of Scotland. Connemara is a little bit more vague where it actually comes from, but it's different, even on the nose, without even having to try this. And for me, a lot of whiskey appreciation and tasting is done through aroma. Completely different whiskey. It's almost a little bit sweeter.
Yep, a little bit sweeter. And I think we mentioned before some of that freshness in the grassiness of the Ardmore, but I find it a lot more vibrant in the Connemara. If you think things like green apple and fresh cut grass, it's kind of a bit more vibrant. It's a bit more of a green whiskey in that regard. And then again, it's kind of got a little bit more creaminess on the palate, and a bit more of that stone fruit's a bit more set there. As I said, I think as well, the oak is a bit more dominating in the Ardmore because of that secondary finish in the quarter cask, whereas again, this is all just first fill ex-bourbon, and it's got a little bit more age to it, so it's probably a bit more maturity in some of the flavors you get, but maybe less of that power and intensity of the oak coming through.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point as well, just harking back to what we were talking about at the very start about, the peats and the peat smoking influence is on the barley stage. So it's the very first part after you've done your farming, got your grain, it's the first thing you do. So it's interesting often, and Laphroaig's a great example, which we're going to get onto a little bit. But the younger Laphroaigs have more smoke and they're more gutsy because, as you were saying there, the longer you leave something in oak, the more influence that oak is going to give it. So certainly, like with the Ardmore, you get more of that. And it's interesting. People are looking for a special occasion, Laphroaig or something, and they're going, we've got, $500 or $1,000 to spend. We want to buy a Laphroaig 25, 27-year-old. And you go, okay, but like, are you looking for big smoke? Then don't go there, because it's all complexity and refinements. Because the older you get in the barrel, the further away you get from your starting point, which is the smoke, which is the terroir, which I think is just like another.
Yep.
And it's good for peat heads. And they're bank balance, because the more smoke you get, you want them younger as possible, and the older they get more expensive. So
yeah, it works well for me when I'm chasing something smoky. So it's nice to like young whiskey. Everyone likes old whiskey. It's just an expensive hobby. That's all.
So Cam, just a question for you. For those people who don't like drinking whiskey straight or on ice, hopefully there's not too many people listening with that comment.
Guys,
if you're going to make a cocktail out of Connemara, what would you suggest that if you're at home, what would you play with?
If you got like a juicer, Connemara and like fresh pressed apple is awesome. It's really delicious. So like if you just got a Breville juicer or something, like Connemara fresh pressed apple is amazing if you want something simple. You can shake it into a sour, it's quite nice. You can do a penicillin as well, a bit of ginger and honey with the Connemara, really nice. It works really well with sort of creamy style drinks. I know that sounds crazy, but yeah, if you were doing something like if you want a dessert style cocktail and you want to find something a bit sweet and creamy with it, it actually works really well. There's a creaminess to Irish whiskey that it really kicks in. And then I guess some of your stir downs, like if you want to make Manhattans and old fashions, by all means, still going to work really well. If you look up a blood and sand, kind of a cocktail with a bit of orange and cherry herring and sweet vermouth, makes a really beautiful blood and sand. I guess any of those more robust whiskey cocktails where you want a little bit of smoke, and sometimes you might find a Laphroaig blows your cocktail away and just tastes like Laphroaig. This is a really good place to get some smoke into your cocktail with a lighter style whiskey that's just not going to dominate it. I'm not gonna lie to you. I think you should just be drinking it kind of like if you find it strong, just add a splash of water. It'll open it up, make it super beautiful. You'll bring those like fruity notes to the front, or put on a little bit of ice if you like. I think there's probably like easier ways to get some whiskey into a cocktail rather than doing a Connemara. But by all means, it's your whiskey. Do what you want.
Just for those people out there who are a bit scared.
Couple of comments on that. One that from the Facebook said with cloudy apple juice, which is what you said at the very start there. And then we've got the hardcores in the Zoom chat because they're calling it sacrilege, water or bust, basically.
I'm not gonna lie, guys. I'm kind of with you Zoom fellas, but
Chris on the Facebook says this one's a little bit sweeter. I think that one's getting the 2 thumbs up. On cocktails, I don't know if you guys remember, but there was a time in a previous life where there was these things called bars, and you had expert bartenders, and what you'd say, they'd make cocktails for you. So the bar just down the road from us here, the Wild Rover, bit of a haunt for me. And we went on a bit of a trek 1 month, just sort of like trying one every night. You make up your own words for it, to take on their Irish penicillin. And basically the end was to throw as much smoky whiskey at it and then mezcal. And it was the most amazing Irish penicillin I've ever had. I can't make it. It's way above my cocktail pay grade. But if you know what you're doing, it can be done.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's one of those ones, I would probably say master the craft of the cocktail you like with the cheap whiskey first. And then when you're good at it, then you can bang your nice whiskey and don't try and learn how to make a cocktail off your good stuff. Make sure you've got it down pat first, but you use the cheap stuff first. If you use Connemara in a mix, you have given up on life. It is the hardcores in the Zoom. It is. Yeah, I thought the Zoom guys would be the hardcore ones for sure. Look, in all honesty, guys, if it comes to mixing your whiskey, it's your whiskey, do what you want with it. Generally speaking, we used to say, this is when I worked in an old whiskey bar and we had to be a bit tongue in cheek about things, but we'd be like, taste the whiskey, give it a scale of 1 to 10 of how hard you find it to drink. 10 it's too much and 1 it's just right. And then just add a drop of water for whatever your ranking was and then 1 for good luck, So just a splash of water won't hurt your whiskey. It will open it up. I almost find adding water to whiskey like decanting wine a little bit. Sometimes you add water to a whiskey, it just ruins it for you. And you're like, well, I got to drink that one neat. And sometimes you do add a splash of water to a whiskey, it just opens it up for you. And it's just trial and error. Splash of water won't really kill it too much for you, but you get to know which whiskeys you like with water. Generally speaking, there are the ones with more smoke or higher ABV or really heavy barrel finishes. But yeah, it's just trial and error. I mean, ice, in all honesty, ice does dull the flavor a little bit. It tightens the whiskey up. Nothing wrong with that as well. It's going to achieve the same sort of thing for you, especially if you're having a good few fingers of whiskey. A bit of ice in there, it just makes it a bit easier to drink. No drama. And yeah, with your cocktails, guys, like there are whiskeys that work really well in cocktails, but I think just start with simple spirits in cocktails. That's what cocktails were invented for. Cocktails were invented to cover up like pretty average spirits. So start with simple stuff, and then if you know that your penicillin's your favorite cocktail and you're amazing at making it, then by all means start putting in stuff like Connemara, Bowmore. I wouldn't go buying your bottle of Connemara and trying to tackle making cocktails with it the first night. So
yeah. I think the takeaway from that is drink whiskey however the hell you want to drink whiskey.
100%.
It's meant to be shared. It's meant to be enjoyed. That's the whole point of it. So share it, the way that is going to be best to enhance and develop conversations with your friends. And I think the end it comes down to, I don't care how you drink your whiskey. Cam doesn't care. Michael doesn't care. The people back at Connemara don't care. As long as you're drinking your whiskey, you drink it however you want. That's all we want. You just keep drinking whiskey.
If you're offering me a whiskey cocktail or like not a whiskey cocktail, I'll still definitely take the cocktail. 100%.
Yeah. If it's a yes or no.
Yeah, if it's this or nothing, I'm like, yeah, I'll definitely take it for sure.
Can I have both?
Yeah, I'll have both, yeah.
Shall we move on to number 3?
Yeah, let's do it. So, guys, what we're going to look at now is the Bowmore. So, started in 1779, one of the oldest distilleries on Islay, and moving into that Islay peat. So, obviously, we discussed peat at the start and having that terroir. Obviously, Islay just has such its own flavour because of that style of peat that they get there. We talked about the malting process. A lot of distilleries actually these days don't do their own malting. They just buy in from a commercial malter. As I said, nothing wrong with that. It doesn't really matter where your barley is malted or where it's coming from, essentially. So, but Bowmore is all about tradition. So we do about 34% of our own maltings. And there is a scale of economy to that, but we're trying to get it to the point where we do more and more and more. So yeah, to give you an idea, at Laphroaig, it's about 11% that we do. Everything is 100% peated at Laphroaig, but only 11% of our maltings are done there. Bowmore, we bring in, we do 34% of our own malting and peating, and then we bring the rest in and blend it together. So, I mean, again, nothing wrong with that. You'll find that most distilleries outsource a large part of the work they're doing. The part that really gives them their character is the stills, the way they run them, and then how they choose to mature and blend their whiskey. So absolutely beautiful. Now, when we think of Islay peat, obviously it's got its own flavour, very iodine, very briny, big smoke. Probably one of your heavier choo-choo trains that you'll tell us about in a second. But essentially, guys, as well, Bowmore is more of a mid-level and lower on that Islay scale. So we're only talking about 20 to 25 parts per million. So it is a jump up in the intensity of the smoke we use, but it's not a massive jump in the amount that we peat that whiskey. It's quite light for an Islay, and probably a really good entry point into Islay whiskey. So yeah, beautiful distillery, really cool. That's actually situated in the town of Bowmore as well, and they did something really, really special for the townspeople. They actually took one of their warehouses, emptied it out, did it up, and actually put a heated 50-meter lap pool in the middle. This was a good thing, but it did have a little bit of a negative side effect for a while. So they put the lap pool in, and they did something really cool. They used the hot water coming out off their condensers to heat the pool, then pump that cold water back into their condensers. So basically, for those who don't exactly know the condenser, when we come out of the copper pot still and we get that lovely vapor, at the end we have the condenser where we turn that vapor back into liquid. The way we accelerate that process is by running cold water through copper tubes through there. And then as that hot vapor hits that cold water, it recondenses into a liquid, and that hot water comes out hot now. We use it to heat the pool. The problem being is that pool was more like tepidly warm rather than nice and hot in Scotland, when you don't really want, you want like a nice hot lap pool. So we actually sort of cranked up the heat that was coming off that water, and because of how cold the water was going in and how hot it was coming out, it was actually creating quite a nasty flavor when the vapor hit those tubes that were in our condensers. Bowmore kind of for a while, particularly back in the early 90s, had a little bit too much of a floral pungent flavor. So some people, in all honesty, might be like, oh, I'm not a big fan of Bowmore. But again, it's about coming back to things that you haven't tried for a while. Since Beam-Suntory took over and set their master distillers, they've actually been like, look, giant multinational, I'm pretty sure we can fund the heating of a pool out of our own pocket and just make sure that the condenser is doing what it's supposed to do and making great whiskey. So the flavor coming off Bowmore in the last 20 years has just been like improving out of sight. So absolutely beautiful whiskey, and now one of my favorites of the Islay collection. The one we're going to try tonight is the small batch. So the small batch is sort of halfway being phased out for the number one. They're both very, very similar whiskies. It's just a naming thing pretty much to bring it into line with the 12 and the 15 and celebrate the number one vaults. The number one vaults are the oldest whiskey warehouse in the world, situated at Bowmore. Absolutely beautiful. If you go to a distillery these days, you'll see that like warehouses have been taken over by OH&S. You go in, it's all like nicely lined and tagged and marked and well lit, and you got to sign things off, and it's all done by like keypad to enter and stuff. This is not the number one vaults. They are old and dank and gross and disgusting and so beautiful. You still open this giant rusted metal door with like an old school giant key and a padlock. The lights are broken, the floor's uneven, there's cracked tiles, like it's just the dankest place ever, and it's so good. You can like smell all the angel share. You can hear the sea crashing against like the side of the warehouse, which is the sea wall where it's got Bowmore written. It really is one of the most beautiful, beautiful distilleries in the world. You can lick the wall if you're a psycho like me, and it tastes like salt and brine. It's absolutely beautiful. But so that number one vaults, we use a little bit of the whiskey from there in all of our whiskeys as best we can, because it captures the majesty of what Bowmore is. So with the small batch, guys, about that sort of, obviously non-age statement, but we're looking about that 9-year-old mark, give or take, as an average. And then it's aged in first and second fill ex-bourbon barrels, just to make sure that smoke comes through as well.
Yeah, it's when I was sort of early on.
Scott.
Yeah, got the photo up there quickly. When I was first getting into peated whiskey and was looking for ways to sort of classify things, just so that I could understand, Bowmore was always like that very fragrant pipe smoke. You know, it was that sort of softer sort of style. And you're right, it's interesting. Distilleries go through phases, whether that be ownership or distillers or supply of materials and whatever that needs to be. And actually, Bowmore had a period, as you were saying, you know, so that 80s and early 90s, where the releases coming out weren't, you know, were quite hit and miss. You either loved them or you hated them. Bowmore has been one of the distilleries, particularly in the last 10 years, and I've been paying a little bit more attention, is that it is getting better and better and better. Like
every year.
A distillery right on the rise. If you go back to stuff from the 60s, and I've been lucky enough to try some very old, sort of 40, 50-year-old Bowmores from the 50s and 60s, unbelievable juice. It's, you know, sort of going that way as well at the moment. I quickly put a photo up there for a few people who saw it. But yeah, I figure that you guys are all on computers or on phones right now, so you can probably just Google images Bowmore and find those images rather than little in the corner there. But it is quite beautiful. And if you look at a picture of Bowmore, the building with the big Bowmore writing on the whitewash sort of walls, that's warehouse number one. I believe it's actually below sea level as well, I think.
Yeah, it is. So it's when you go in, you walk down into, it's like 2 stories, but the first story is at sea level, and the second story is at sea level, and the first one's below sea level. So it's really cool. Yeah. Absolutely beautiful. The reason, I guess, for those who don't know, you see all the beautiful Islay distilleries, and these big white buildings, but then like the letters just written in big black writing. The reason for that is back when the ships used to come across to either pick up or drop stuff off to the distilleries, you'd see 4 big white buildings on the coastline, but not know which one you were supposed to be going at, so they could shine a big floodlight and actually see where they were supposed to be sort of looking for. That's essentially the reason why they all kind of have that same facade facing the ocean, which is just beautiful. But for those who are trying the Bowmore, we sort of say we have essentially 4 pillars of flavor to all the Bowmore whiskey. So obviously there's smoke. Now for me, that smoke starts kind of, as we said, quite light and a little bit light for an Islander, and it's almost like a little sort of almost rubbery, I guess. It's kind of got that leathery sort of feel to it. And then as you get older in the Bowmores, it really becomes quite like a complicated leather and deep, rich smoke. We've got sweetness. Bowmore sweetness for me is actually quite honeyed. And then as you get older in the whiskeys, you start bringing things out like treacle, molasses with that maturity. There's fruit, the American oak, ex-bourbon, quite young. You get that real sort of like pineapple and mango and real tropical fruit that's quite overripe. And then as you go through and add some more sherry and some of those older Bowmores, it becomes quite dark and fruit, and the stone fruit starts to kick in. And then obviously the salt for me just follows through. It's just that beautiful, fresh, like sea salt that you get all the way through your Bowmores. But it is quite nice to, if you think of it in those 4 flavor pillars, see how it matures and changes through the older whiskies. In saying that as well, like a lot of us love our Bowmore sherry bombs. I know like the 15 is amazing, and the 12 and the 18, and we've started to put a bit more sherry into our age statements, and of course, like become quite famous for doing some of those sherry style whiskies. But I think a really lovely one to get your hands on the small batch, and in the future, the number 1 that's starting to be released now, as just a place to see where that beautiful Bowmore flavor lives before we go and sort of appreciate it with those sherry finishes.
So just in regards to that, Scott, so Bowmore 1 is now available here in Australia. For those people who do really love that Bowmore flavour or the distillery itself, here in Australia, we're going to be very, very lucky later on this year with 3 brand new releases of age statement. So we've actually got a 27 coming, a 30 coming, and also for those people who have been following the Vault series, we actually released number 1 2.5 years ago. Due to the rest of the world not doing a great job of it, it was actually canned. It was actually brought back to life.
Not your fault. It was the rest of the world's fault, was it?
Rest of the world. Australia did a really great job. We sold all our allocation, most of it in New South Wales. But we've actually got number 2 coming out later on this year. So we've actually got towards the tail end of this year, and currently still in place, we'll have 3 brand new releases of Bowmore later on this year. So it's something to keep an eye out for if you do love that Bowmore flavour.
Bit of a comment here on the YouTube as well from Andrew Birdsall, who is a bit of an Oak Bar regular. Says, hello to the crew and capitals now. Hello, Bowmore. Fantastic drop. So there you go.
Yeah, nice.
That's your marketing done for next year. Hello, Bowmore.
Hello, Bowmore. Beautiful.
Yeah. And obviously don't do it now, but when you are planning your holidays for the next sort of couple of years, go to regional Australia first, spend all your money there. When you spend all your money there, go to Islay, because it is beautiful, and you can get the ferry across, put the car on the ferry and go across. But I actually flew from Glasgow, direct from Glasgow to Bowmore Airport, and just lucked out on a clear day. There's not that many clear days in Islay, and actually saw the white warehouses on the seaside as I was flying over the top of Islay. It's still one of the those pinch yourself sort of flights. Did I actually do that? Did that happen? It's a beautiful, beautiful town.
If you're not good with flying, definitely get the ferry. And if you're not good with seasickness, definitely get the plane. If you're not good with either, you're in a bit of trouble. But I got the plane, but it was a really rough flight when I got it. Yeah, I think we had to go around and try and land twice. But
Or be like one of our bosses, Louise, who flew all the way over there and actually they couldn't land and had to go back to Scotland.
Does happen a bit. I think there's only one plane. Yeah, and if the plane can't get off, you're sort of stuck there for a little longer.
But worth it when it felt well worth it when you get there, 100%.
Yeah. And you're safe in the knowledge that wherever you're going and however you're getting there, there's always going to be a whiskey waiting for you at the other end.
Absolutely, that is 100% guaranteed.
Yeah. So I haven't actually had this whiskey for a little while, as sort of Michael was saying. And on the price list, you'll see there's the Bowmore number 1 rather than the Bowmore small batch at the moment. This is sort of the last bastion of it in the country, but I haven't had this whiskey for a little while. And I'm actually getting like a little bit of that rancio sort of notes on the back palate, which is quite interesting, which is sort of like that mushroomy, earthy sort of thing. Yeah. You see it a lot in tequila and mezcals and that sort of stuff. But just sort of that spice thing, which I hadn't come across in Bowmore for a little while. And it's quite interesting because being a younger whiskey, we're getting a more honest and naked take on what the distillery and what the distillers are actually doing at the moment, because we're closer to that the source point.
You can't have that. There is no way around that trade-off. The more time something spends in oak, the less of that distillery characteristic you can find. There are some ways of trying to work around that a little by taking something quite old and then blending it with something quite young and trying to have that vibrant distillery characteristic and that lovely aged wood there. And people are putting that together pretty well these days. Obviously, the problem with that for your whiskey makers is if you've got all that beautifully well-aged stuff and then you add something younger in, you can't have that lovely age statement go with it. You're not allowed to say it's 95% 18-year-old, and sorry, I just had to throw 5% a 9-year-old in there for the distillery characteristics. You're not allowed to do that. So obviously, you lose that age statement. So I guess that's the trade-off for a lot of the guys. You can't have that lovely sort of distillery characteristic shining through as brightly in your age statement whiskies. But again, it comes back to the maturation. I think there's a lot of distilleries out there who do beautiful, beautiful, well-aged whiskies that you can still put your finger on kind of where it comes from. I mean, I guess the older it gets, the harder it is to tell, essentially. But
yeah.
So, Cam, a question for you, Cam. Just a quick one. Out of all the more distilleries, you've been there, you've licked the wall. What would you think would be, out of all of the Bowmores that are available here in Australia, would be your favourite?
I think the 18 is my favourite. But if you're bringing price into the equation, then probably the 15.
Yeah,
if I'm not paying, I'll take the 18. If I've got to buy, we're getting 15. So.
Yeah. Just on the YouTube, Big Dog Whiskey Club represent tuning in. So we got some big dogs in the house. Dog with a double G. Don't know what that means. But more
bark.
Double pour, I guess. If you got double G. Steam train note for this one. I think it's going downhill somewhere. So you've worked really hard to get up the hill, up the incline, and then you sort of pull back the regulator a little bit, let the pressure do its own thing, and so you get just like these softer smoke coming out. And you're not, if you're sitting in the cabin, you're not madly firing coal in at the moment as well. So there's a little bit less of that note as well. Is the patent steam train note for this one?
Nice.
See, the bad banter doesn't matter whether it's virtual in a room. It stays.
So guys, just before we kick on to our last whiskey, I thought I would, for the people who sort of want to get their head around the world of whiskey, no one wants to read a whole bunch of stuff. It's not the funnest way to do it. But if you do want to read something, I thought I would show you sort of one of my favorite resources to sort of have a look through. So you've got the Dave Broom, the World Atlas of Whiskey, really good. Takes you around the world. It's got more than 200 distilleries in it, more than 750 different types of whiskey. They go through like India, Scotland, America, Canada, like Scandinavia, everywhere, the whole world, and discuss about how that region makes their whiskey and what makes it different. It's really simple. It's not involved. Mine's been a little bit destroyed and just overused, but there's like beautiful pictures in it, guys. Like it's absolutely amazing. So if you do want to get one book of whiskey that you can kind of leaf through and have a bit of a finger over there, Dave Broom's an amazing writer, and this book, the second edition I've got is absolutely beautiful. I don't know if he's got a third out, but yeah, it's a cracking book. So if you do feel like getting something to break up your isolation and your whiskey drinking a bit, check that out. A really nice light read, some beautiful pictures of distilleries and some really cool whiskeys in there. So if you do want to read something a little bit, in saying that, you don't have to read books. The best way to learn whiskey is to drink it, but it is the book I would recommend if you want one. So,
Go on.
No. What was that?
I just had a question on the YouTube, which is quite an interesting question that sort of is pertinent to our times here. Every year there's a big festival on Islay called Fischile, and the world, basically Germans and Scandinavians, descend on Islay. Festivals, music, and everyone releases a bottling. And the question was, Dan Woolley, with Fischile being cancelled for this year, are the special releases going to come out? And it's a really interesting question, and we're not sure yet. It'll be up to each distillery to play its part. And the two gentlemen here might ask another question, but one that's actually quite interesting is I know for a fact a lot of Japanese distilleries were holding back stock for special releases around the Olympics, which has now been pushed back a year. So this is all in a little bit of a state of flux, and I think each distillery is sort of reading the market. A lot closer to home, there's Australian distilleries who were looking to launch onto the market in June, July, August. Our whiskey festival, Sydney Whiskey Fair at the end of August, people were sort of gearing up around that. And now does that sort of push things back a little bit? So the answer to that one is, from my point of view, we're just going to have to wait and see. I don't know if you guys have heard anything different on that.
No official communication on it yet. And I think it would still be in very much the mindset of wait and see. As well, like it's another thing to keep in mind. A lot of distilleries are pretty much being, well, they're not forced, but asked to and happily obliging to make hand sanitizer. Like I know in Claremont, Kentucky, pretty much all the experimental stuff we're doing is has kind of been put on hold to make like massive amounts of hand sanitizer for first responders and stuff like that. That's not uncommon here to Australia. Where I am in Sydney, most of the gin distilleries, local ones, are pretty much all making bulk hand sanitizer at the moment. So
Archie Rose, the boys at Archie Rose, same thing. So it's great.
The Poor Tums guys, there's heaps of them doing it around here. So the answer is I don't know. And I think from my understanding around that, all new releases, particularly for here in Australia, are sort of being like, it's a wait and see. We'll just get the information when it comes down the line. But to be honest, I think particularly as well in this time, there's a lot of concern for things outside of that as well. It's obviously, it's always a focus to release the good juice we have, but it's also, there's a whole lot of other things to consider. So, but the honest short answer is I don't know. My latest that I've heard is everything's still wait and see. But I mean, it'd be nice if we get it.
Yeah, I mean, we are talking in a bubble here. We're here running a whiskey tasting, and we're talking about whiskey, and we're talking about the whiskey industry. Obviously, there are bigger fish to fry than special whiskey releases, but in the bubble of us, there's also a sort of commercial obligation. So again, sort of bringing it back to an example that we can talk about. I had been planning, Whiskey Fair takes about 18 months to plan. We had 4 special releases, either single cask or special whiskey bottlings, that were coming for August. We had to sort of stop all of that because you need a market to sell that to. You know, if the event doesn't happen, it's really hard to sell those hundreds of bottles of whiskey. So it's very much wait and see because we just don't know. And Aaron brings up a very, very important point. When will we start seeing hand sanitizer with age statements? It's because I only use these days, and I showed a quick thing. We're using Carew from the Gin Distillery in North Richmond and Bricks, the rum distillery just up the road. That's what the oak barrel is being powered by at the moment. But I actually only use single cast strength hand sanitizer these days. Going full hand sanitizer wanker. But yeah, I think wood chipped or barrel aged hand sanitizer could be a thing. Spectacular waste of money it would be.
You joke, but like there's literally about a week when this first went down with all the like crazies with panic buying stuff. I just couldn't get a bar of soap or hand wash or anything. And, I just hadn't thought about it. And so I did have like a bottle of 98% like heads of from Sipsmith Distillery that we had over for a training. And that was like my hand sanitizer for about a week or two. So.
And we've been joking about it on a few of the other streams, but this is a whiskey that I have here. Can't sell it to you because it's society. It's a whiskey here that's exactly 60%. So we talk about like 40% minimum for whiskey. Then you talk about 57.17 as sort of Navy strength or gunpowder brew for rum. But I think in a post-COVID world, we will see the term hand sanitizer strength as whiskies and spirits are above 60%. So
2020, 60%.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. Hand sanitizer strength.
Yeah.
Quickly repeat the name of the book. It's called The World Atlas of Whiskey that Cameron showed. I use it here at the Oak Barrel all the time.
It's by Dave Brook, World Atlas of the Whiskey, and I think second edition's the latest one, but they're all good. So.
Yeah, I think there is working on a third edition, was with what I heard, but he's also been busy making films and being stuck in isolation in New Zealand and that sort of stuff as well. Didn't quite make it back to Scotland after Dramfest Dave, but it does mean, I think it's Dave Wasabi is his Instagram.
It is, yeah.
He started reviewing things on his Instagram in isolation, so jump on that as well.
Just on that, for those guys who are asking about the Fasciolander Cartridge release, which I'll explain what that is for the others who don't know later, but for those guys who do know and are part of the Friends of Laphroaig, nothing official has come down the line yet, but I dare say there's a 50-50 chance that you guys find out as soon as I do. So, like, if you're on their mailing list or if you're a friend of Laphroaig, you guys will probably know as soon as I know. So,
speaking of which,
shall we? So, finishing off with a lot of people's favorite distillery in the world. I know I'm very much a fan, and potentially the most recognizable peated single malt in the world, in that of Laphroaig. An absolute behemoth of smoke, a beast of peat, absolutely beautifully delicious, means hollow by the bay, a fantastic whiskey. And the madness is it's actually quite light as well. And you'll understand when I explain a little bit about how we make it, but a beautiful whiskey. 1815, the distillery is opened. We celebrated our 200th year not long ago. And on that 200th year in 2015, we released a campaign called Opinions Welcome. You can go onto YouTube and have a look at it. And it's basically us giving people their taste of Laphroaig for the first time. And just the wide range of opinions we get back. Now, It is a polarizing whiskey. We're very happy with that. We like it, and we say opinions welcome, because some people will say some of the most horrible stuff about it of all time. Totally understand. It is like having a salty bonfire in your mouth. So people just say it's the grossest thing ever, but other people like us, we absolutely love it. We're mad for it. Absolutely beautiful. So what we're going to try now is the select or select cask. Essentially what we had is the 10-year-old is beautiful, 100% 10-year-old ex-Maker's Mark bourbon barrels. A real purist Laphroaig, simply delicious. But as an entry level, quite intense. Big smoke, a really full-on wood flavor. So what we did is we sort of crafted something a bit more pleasing to all and a bit more of an entry-level Laphroaig. And I really love it. I think it's beautiful. And this actually, when we talk about cocktails, this does, if you want to add some smoke into penicillin and stuff, is the way to go. So absolutely beautiful, guys. So what we've done is we've taken a bit of a cross-section of whiskies here. And this is where it came into what we're talking about before. We've obviously the biggest, smokiest Laphroaig that comes off the still is the youngest. And as we age and mature, we lose a bit more of that smoke and intensity. So we take a cross-section of whiskies from 5 to 11 years, so equal parts of all those whiskies. So we make sure we have some of the maturity there and some of the younger stuff. That's all coming from brand new ex-Maker's Mark bourbon barrels. We then put it for 6 to 9 months in American Oak ex-bourbon quarter casks, some really intense wood aging. Then we give it another 2 years in Spanish Oak ex-Oloroso sherry. So the first whiskey tonight, we've got a nice whack of sherry in. That sherry is and Spanish Oak. Spanish Oak gives us more color, gives us more of that sort of Christmas spice and dried fruit. And that Oloroso sherry brings in that sort of citrus and that dried fruit as well. And then we finish it again for about almost another year in Spanish Oak, but this time Pedro Jimenez sherry, that lovely sticky, thick sherry that gives us those dark fruit notes, those chocolates, that little bit of sort of mint and leather. Those really, really big fruit notes. So you've got a whiskey that's got a lot of wood interaction there. You're talking about 2 different types of oak in 3 different sizes and 3 different seasonings. So much going on there. I'm basically taking all that complexity and putting it into a young, vibrant Laphroaig. Absolutely beautiful whiskey. Honestly, like almost one of my favorites in the whole Laphroaig range, even though it's quite entry. Really, really delicious, guys. So I'm going to start with having a taste.
A couple of comments coming in from around the ground, so to speak. I kind of like in this virtual world trying to apply real world situations, and there's obviously 3 chats going on at the moment, and it's quite interesting because the Zoom is sort of like sitting at the bar, asking the bartender a lot of serious questions, really mulling over the drams, that sort of thing. If I look behind me to where the booths are, you've got the Facebook chat where it's just a bunch of old friends catching up for after work drinks and that sort of thing. And then downstairs in the nightclub is YouTube, where I don't really know what's going on there. I try and read out some of those. I think there's their own conversation. There's a lot of big dogs. Yeah, a lot of big dogs. Give us that famous wolf, big dog. Yeah, I think, that's the one you sort of walk into the room and go like, oh, yeah, I'm not ready for that yet. And sort of back out. I'll go back to the Facebook room. But at least
YouTube guys have been finishing their sample with each taste, for sure.
Yeah. One thing I will say as well, and I think is one of the most important things about tastings like this is you might own all of these whiskies at home. You might have all 4 and they might all be open, but you're unlikely to sit there one night and go through each one. You might have 4 whiskies, but you might pull from one and then go into a second one. So actually doing them in a lineup and being able to compare and contrast is really important. And, doing something, if we did this the other way around, the select would have been really potent, because as soon as you open a Laphroaig, everyone in the room, everyone in the house knows you've opened a Laphroaig. There's no way of hiding that smell. But it's actually a good way of sort of taking that intensity off by working up to it through some other peated notes. Again, sort of getting back to one of my early points is, appreciating peated and smoky whiskey is taking the smoke and going, yep, but how does that balance with everything else that's going on in the whiskey? And so I think that's really important to do.
So to give, and this is a little bit more in depth for some of the guys who've heard a lot of the Laphroaig chat before, to give you a bit about how we make Laphroaig, it is a really complexly made whiskey as well. So as I said, we do about 11% of our own maltings and then buy in from Port Ellen some malted barley. But we do 100% of our own peating at Laphroaig. I've actually shoveled the peat in there. Another thing that we do really differently is when you take peating, for example, at places like Bowmore and a lot of the Islay distilleries, what they'll do is they'll quite intensely peat for maybe like 6 to 8 hours, and then they'll turn the heat on without the smoke, and they'll just sort of dry it out over the next day. So they smoke it sort of cold or smoke it damp and then dry it out. Laphroaig, they really crank the fire up and they just give it an intense sort of like 10 to 12 hours smoking. Essentially what it is there is the smoke is a little more vibrant because it just doesn't have a chance to dissipate while the grain's drying. It sticks as it dries. It's sort of the theory behind how they do it, but they're one of the only guys to sort of do like smoking and drying in the same process. It's quite rare for that to be the case. Then on top of that, when we come to the distillation, stills, for those who know, usually work in pairs. So you have sort of your wash still or your beer still. So you're taking that lower 10% alcohol and putting it into the first still, and then the second still is the low wine still or does the second distillation, the spirit still gets it up to that 60%. So essentially what's happening there is they work in pairs. There's still 1 and still 2. And so we usually say we've got 3 pairs of stills or 4 pairs of stills. Now, Laphroaig's a little different. We have 3 pairs of stills, and the second still, the spirit still is quite small. They're only like about 3,000 to 4,000 liters in that range. And because they're quite small and they actually have the really long sort of, that we call the swan neck, and then there's the swing arm that takes it to the condenser. And these swing arms actually sort of, or line arms, if you will, they head up towards the condenser. Now, obviously, because that arm's higher, it's only the lighter style of vapors that will make it all the way up there. As your vapors heat, they can fall back down as well. And so it takes a lot of energy, and then only the lighter flavors and the lighter vapors make it all the way to that condenser. So we have 3 really small copper pot stills with really high line arms. So we get a really light, fruity spirit out of those 3 pairs of stills. Now we do have another second spirit still that's a lot larger. It sits more up around that 8,000-9,000 mark. It's about 3 times the size. And it actually has a line arm that runs down once we get it over the neck of that still. That larger still with that big neck means it's actually the larger, heavier vapors. A lot of those get to come through from that distillation. So all that aside, to put it in layman's terms, we've got sort of 75%, give or take, of what we're putting into our spirit stills each time is producing this really light, fruity heart of the Laphroaig. And then you're like, but it's such a big, intense whiskey. Well, then this other still is making this big, oily, super smoky, super iodine, robust spirit. And then we marry those back together before anything goes into the maturation stage. So it's kind of like having our cake and eating it too. How do we get this lovely, light heart of our run that's fruity and floral, while we also get this big, fat, long tail of our run that's got all these like oily, smoky, heavy flavors. So that's why it is a real complex and a different way to make whiskey. There are other distilleries that have different shapes and sizes of stills, but that's kind of a bit of a new and modern thing, or it's just unique to some distilleries. In a lot of cases, they just look all the same. Sort of, they have their own shape and size that defines their character. So that makes Laphroaig super, super complex in the way they do things. And then obviously just the maturation stage. We do have a lot of different barrels we use there. So a really complex whiskey, guys, absolutely beautiful. And I think one of the cooler whiskeys as well. So this is one of the cooler parts that everyone can kind of be involved in. Every time you buy one of the full bottles of Laphroaig, you'll see a little unique passport, a little green slip, and it has a number on it. You go in and enter that online, and you become part of a small club that we have called the Friends of Laphroaig. I think there's about 1 million members in it now. And what happens with that, guys, is because you're a friend, they'll send you a piece of paper that you can frame and put up, and it basically means you're an owner of 1 square foot of land at the distillery. When you do get across to Islay, eventually you can go to the distillery, and they'll give you galoshes and a little GPS tracker and a little Aussie flag or whatever your nation's flag is, and you go out and find your square foot of land and you put your flag in it, and then you come back to the distillery probably like cold and wet, a little bit miserable, I'm not gonna lie, but then because those mooch and buggers have been on your land making whiskey, they have to pay you rent. And as you can guess, your rent is a bit of whiskey. So they take you into the warehouse, and they've got a few different barrels lined up of all sorts of cool stuff. When I was there, it was like a first fill Pedro Jimenez cask. There's some quarter. My favorite at the time was just an 11-year-old ex-bourbon, just straight at cask strength. It was beautiful. They had some interesting stuff there. And you go through and try them all. You pick the one you like, and you pour yourself a half bottle of Laphroaig. There's a giant leather book there. You go and open it up, and it's got like the page marker there, and you can see all the comments of all the people who've been there before, and you write your time, your date, your opinion, because opinion's welcome, and then the fact that they paid you your rent that day. You can do it as many times as you want. Every time you can go back every day and do that experience and claim your rent. So really, really cool. The other thing about being a friend of Laphroaig, as we mentioned, is Islay, or the Islay Festival. We do our release for the Islay Festival called Carchis, which is Gaelic for friends. And basically the only way to buy that whiskey is to be at the Islay Festival or be a friend of Laphroaig. You can jump online and purchase it as well. The cool thing about it as well is we always ask the community, the Friends of Laphroaig are allowed to feedback and give comments on what they would like to see in the year's release at the Islay. So last year we said, what do you want to see? And there's heaps of comments saying, we want more cask strength stuff. We want more cask strength. And people are like, we want age state. We want 16 years again. We want 16 years. And people are like, we want more triple wood. So we just like, all right, 16-year-old cask strength triple wood. There you go. There's your release. You're all happy. So we definitely, we take that feedback on. There's been some really experimental casks in there. Some Amontillado, Manzanilla, some really interesting sort of sherries and wines that have done some stuff in there. I've got a couple of drops left of a 15-year-old quarter cask that is I'm saving, but I think I might knock it off later tonight. But it's absolutely beautiful. So really, really cool to be part of that club. And I think I've kind of covered most of it, guys. For those, it's probably not on your little mini bottle, but if you've seen the full size, you've got the Royal Warren that the Prince of Wales gave to us. Obviously, like the Prince's favorite whiskey. It's the only thing he drinks, so he gave us that Royal Warren, one of the first whiskey distilleries, or the only whiskey distillery to have that Royal Warren on it. And I have to throw a little bit of a thanks out to my old mate Dan Woolley, who used to work with us. We lived together for a little bit, and I went in and saw there was just some like Laphroaig bottles that just had no label on them, and I was like, "What's that?" And he's like, "So the Prince used to get his own Laphroaig 14-year-old at 50% alcohol, and they used to just ship it out to all his cellar masters in his like holiday houses and stuff like that, so he could drink it." And eventually they made a mistake one day. Didn't put his labels. He had his own labels. He didn't put it on the bottle. So they sent it out to his house, and one of his cellar masters was like, "Send it back. It's no good." So Dan was at the distillery and sort of nagged John Campbell and said, "What's that? What's that? What's that?" And I think John knew that if he didn't give it to him, he'd probably take it anyway. So he was like, "Look, you can have one of those bottles." So I was lucky enough to try the Princess Laphroaig, and it was delicious. So yeah, definitely an amazing whiskey, guys. And if you speak to any of the friends or the family of Laphroaig, they'll all have their own cool stories about it, and they'll love affair with it. So I do encourage you to get amongst it, be a friend, and enjoy the whiskey. But definitely an amazing distillery.
So Scott, like we did last time with Dan's last hooray at the Oak Barrel, which went over 2 nights because we sold out both nights. We do have the opportunity where if anybody wants to turn and purchase a bottle of Laphroaig tonight from yourself, we can put up onto the website the opinions welcome. I do have that facility available. I am on holidays, but when I get back, I will turn and drop into the shop and go through it all for you and print out their labels for you if you like.
Yeah. Well, it's something we can look into. I'll get in touch with people because I saw a couple of people buying bottles just before. But it is very true that opinions welcome tasting was very, very prominent in sort of the brand, and it's promoted and sort of spawned a lot of very interesting tasting notes. And our friend from Victoria, Tom Scott, has come in with a couple of comments on the Facebook there. 2 of the best tasting notes he's heard in regards to Laphroaig were, "It's like licking a seagull's armpit." And the other one was like kissing a mermaid after eating barbecue.
We'll get him back, Scott. We will get him back.
Yeah. So, and these are all very
works with us.
These are all very valid, officially head office approved tasting notes for Laphroaig.
Ray here up at Webster's got through. I think it was what Mad Max drinks on the Fury Road. So I was like, very nice.
Yeah,
that's cool.
And I am just going to, I've got a photo here quickly. I might just share to my screen. This is a photo I took actually on Islay at Laphroaig, and it just gives people an idea of what peat actually looks like when it's in the ground. So obviously it's just dirt in the ground.
It was a nice day.
It was a beautiful day. I lucked out. And you've got shovels that are essentially at a right angle, and you just cut into the wall basically along these sort of like edges in the field. Then you can sort of see there's a few chucked up on the top, just where the green grass is. Just these like sort of big long rectangles of mud. They dry out, and then they go to the kiln and get burnt. So it is very much coming from the ground, and an intrinsic part of terroir when it comes to whiskey, which is kind of cool. How much is the Bowmore? Good question. It's on the website there. I will repost that link, Peter. So you can see that one there.
Just beware, guys. He makes it look really glorious there. It's usually like rating sideways, cold, and super muddy. So it's usually just like shoveling mud. So yeah, that's
what
one of the nicest.
You got a good day.
Yeah, it was. We lucked out a lot, and actually we were at one of the distilleries. I think it was. Wasn't the Laphroaig? It was the day after. I think it was Ardmore. Was sitting in doing like their tasting at the end, and they said the week before they'd all lost power, and so they did all these tastings by candlelight, which would have been kind of cool as well, I thought. But yeah, I kind of liked just riding a bike around Ireland. That was a little bit more pleasurable.
Very doable. It's only small, so you can definitely ride a bike for sure.
Yeah. I did put a quick poll out there for people if they wanted to vote on what their favourite whiskey was of the night so far, and it's been a really even split so far. I might just end that polling. I think everyone's had a go there. 100% voted, yep. So we can see the results.
Wow.
15% Ardmore, 19% Connemara, 23% Bowmore, and 42 Laphroaig. But that's a very even split. Personally, I think, Steam Train Night, this is going uphill. This is that bit of like that metal flintiness that sort of steel element, throwing coals bouncing off iron and all that sort of stuff going uphill, working really hard.
More sawdust?
Sawdust? No sawdust. Coal-fired steam engine, mate. It's not America. No wood-fired engines here. But yeah, I think I would have to go Ardmore is my pick. I do have a real soft spot for Ardmore. And I think you've probably heard this story, Cam, is when they had to change to steam power rather than coal-fired, they spent a lot of time working on the steam coil because as you know, if you light a fire, whether it's from coal or wood or anything, fire is imperfect, and you were getting hot spots on the bottom of the steel, and that would burn bits of malt and get these heavier flavors. When they had to go to steam, it's perfect. It's nice and even flow. So they actually went around and tried to like break the steam coil to create pressure points and that sort of thing so that they could try and recreate that flavor profile, which is something I just love about Ardmore. They spent a lot of time trying to recreate that. Really cool. I mean, I think one of our only last remaining sort of direct fire injection stills is the Hakushu guys. But yeah, really, really cool to try and replicate those little nuances in stills that give you different flavors. I mean, we're different, obviously in America, but when we're at Maker's Mark, our master distiller over there, he was like, I've just got our third and our newest still. And he's like, she gives me grief. Like, she just doesn't do what she's supposed to do. It's like, isn't it exactly the same? It's like exactly the same down to every last piece of it is like identical, but still, he's like, they've got minds of their own. So it is sort of half science and half passion. It's really cool how like a certain ding in a still can add or change to a flavor, get these little redistillations and sort of reflux coming through and yeah, different patches of heat and stuff. And as we said with Bowmore, just the way the temperature through the condenser changed, the way the whiskey tastes. So it is quite a finicky labor of love, but really cool. You get all these stories and these little, they seemingly insignificant differences that just make these amazing changes to the flavor of distillery characteristic you're getting in all these amazing distilleries. What was your favorite tonight, Cam? Oh, yeah, I always flop between them, but I'm going to say I'm still a sucker for the Connemara. So. Yep. Mike? Bowmore. Okay, yep. Awesome. Well, guys, thank you very much. I know you've got lots of places to be tonight, but thank you for tuning in here. And this was something that sort of, as soon as it became apparent we were unlikely to be running tastings in the flesh here for a little while, did jump on the blower to people who I knew had these miniatures and particularly packs of them done up, because I think that it's excellent to be able to like see the labels and that sort of thing rather than my handwriting on bottles I've filled out the back. It also helps keeping as many hands off things as possible. So a big thank you to you guys for being involved. Big thank you to everyone on the stream. Bit of chatter on Facebook. I've given up on YouTube. I'm too scared to go back there.
That's the nightclub.
That's the nightclub.
Penrith Leeds.
Yeah. Thank you to everyone. If you have any more questions, feel free to shoot them through. We will get answering them as we can. We'll be back tomorrow night with bourbon.
Happy days.
which is going to be good fun. And there's some serious booze in some of those bourbons as well, which could be interesting. So yeah, everyone, get home safe. I think you've all earned to pour yourself another one. If you've been very good and poured 50ml pours like we all have been doing,
Yes, Scott.
yeah, feel free to pour yourself another one as a bit of a pat on the back. Couple of things just here. A lot of love for the Laphroaig. Bit of talking about that. Laphroaig's very good for nights in front of the fires out in Young. Or in Orange, where it has snows. And I actually think the fine people of Young and that sort of region got a bit of rain in the last week. So hopefully that sort of helped the farmers out there. Because when you talk about essential working, farmers are pretty much really the only essential workers going around at the moment. Yeah, thank you everyone for joining in. But yeah, awesome. You guys want to add
from
anything?
the exchange to the Oak Barrel, thank you very much for inviting both myself and Cam to be part of the virtual experience. I think it's been a great opportunity to try and showcase some of our whiskies. So, mate, thank you very much.
I only invited Cam. You sort of came along as a bundle. So,
guys, thank you so much. To those guys who were asking about the cartridge for this year, I will flick off an email and see if I can't get us an update. And if I have it, I'll give it to you tomorrow. But yeah, I will try and do my very best to find out for us because I'm actually curious now as well. But please, guys, I thank you for being here. And if you do have any questions, flick them to Scott. And if we don't know, I will source the answers as best I can. So thank you.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
All right. See you tomorrow night.
So I'm just going to shut off the streams on Facebook and YouTube.
That was pretty good, mate.
We'll let the Zoom run a little bit longer because